Hey, what's up? It's Tuhu. It's been a little bit since my last guide, and now that Blade's right around the corner, I figure it's time to crank out that Seele guide that I said I'd do before everyone goes apeshit for Blade once he's out. So, here's how to play Bronya's girlfriend in any universe, Seele. Seele is a 5-star quantum character, our first limited rate-up 5-star character in fact, debuting at the very start of Honkai Star Rail's full public release. She's part of the Hunt Path, meaning she's a straight-up, no-nonsense DPS character. The TLDR is this: Seele is the best and most consistent DPS in the game. This may change in the future as we get more and more DPS characters, and we'll see if Seele eventually turns into the Diluc of Star Rail or not, but as of this video, I firmly believe that she's the second best character in the game, second only after her BFF. As always, let's take a look at her stats first. At level 80, Seele has base 931 HP, 640 attack, 336 defense, and 115 speed. Comparing these stats to other DPSs like Welt and Jingyuan, she's definitely built more like a glass cannon, having high attack and speed but relatively lower HP and defense, which should be typical of characters from the Hunt Path since, they're supposed to be the DPS class of the game. Speaking of her speed, she is the fastest character in the game at 115, and the next two fastest characters after her are Tingyun and Danheng, who have 112 and 110 respectively. This is so fast that running speed boots on her is actually suboptimal, as I'll explain in more detail later. And this is in a game where, outside of a few exceptions like Seele herself, all of your characters should be running speed boots. Because if you're not, your teams are going to get outsped by enemies with 130 plus speed of their own in MOC 10 and smack your characters twice before they even get to move once. I hope you enjoy watching that. Anyways, moving on to her kit, Cells at Work's skill is called Sheath Blade, which is a single target skill that deals 110 to 275% of her attack as quantum damage and increases her speed by 25% for 2 turns. Other than its actual animation, this skill from a mechanical perspective doesn't seem too fancy or flashy. All it does is deal damage and increase her speed. But what the game doesn't tell you is its hit count, and it hits 3 times. For those of you who watched my guide on Silverwolf, you'll know that I explained there why hit count in Star Rail is so important, which is that in this game, individual hits of an attack can crit. My biggest gripe with running Silverwolf as a DPS is that both her skill and ultimate are only a single hit each, which means that if she doesn't crit, she's going to be losing out on a ton of potential damage. This translates to Silverwolf needing high crit rate to make a DPS build with her at least somewhat consistent. Seele's skill, on the other hand, having 3 hits on it means that her skill is not an all or nothing situation like Silverwolf's are, because even if she misses like 1 or 2 crits, she still might be able to crit the 3rd one or something. This gives her skill damage a much more stable floor, assuming that she's got a decent crit rate to go with that, of course, but precisely because of her skill's hit count, she can get away with having lower crit rate than Silverwolf does. So the high hit count, Seele's high attack as a hunt character, and its single target nature together make this the best DPS skill in the game. It's Seele's bread and butter. She basically lives and dies by this skill here. And we haven't even talked about the speed buff yet. The 25% speed buff Seele gets from using her skill further reinforces the fact that she does not need speed boots at all. And because it lasts for 2 turns, it means that Seele can afford not to use her skill the next turn if you don't have any skill points then, or if you need to save them to use someone else's skill, giving you some flexibility in that sense. Self-checkout's ultimate is called Butterfly Flurry, or some of you may know it as
Disappear among the sea of butterflies, illusions of the past,
or just like her skill, this ultimate is very simple, mechanically speaking, because all it does is deal 255 to 510% quantum damage to a single target, but it also puts her into her buffed state, which is weird, since MiHoYo usually gives effects like these all sorts of complicated names, but for whatever reason, for Seele here in Star Rail, they just looked at it and were like, yeah, we're just gonna call it her buffed state and call it a day. And again, just like her skill, there's more to this ult than its mechanical simplicity. For one, it has the second highest single target ultimate scaling in the game, behind only, surprisingly enough, Physical MC, who has like 525% scaling at level 15. So on paper at least, Seele should be hitting really freaking hard with her ult. Unfortunately, her ult isn't blessed with a high hit count like her skill is, since it's only a single hit. It's part of the reason why I called Seele Seele's skill her bread and butter, because if her ult doesn't crit, her skill can actually easily do more damage, assuming that they're around the same level. So if your Seele doesn't have high crit rate yet, it's almost better to treat her ult as a way to break enemies, not as a source of damage necessarily. I say almost because even if her ult doesn't crit, it still has a secondary effect, which is to put her into her buff state, and just to make it easy on myself, I'll just call her Buff Seele to refer to the state. When Buff Seele is active, as indicated by the skill icon under Seele's portrait on the battle UI, she then deals 40 to 100% extra damage for one turn. The kicker is that Seele gives herself this buff first, and then deals damage when she ults, so even if she doesn't crit, she should still do decent damage, though obviously be way better if she did crit with a buff like that. There's a second way to get Buff Seele, and that's with her talent, which is called Resurgence. When Seele kills an enemy in any way, as in with her basic skill or ult, doesn't matter what, as long as she's the one to put down an enemy for good, you also get Buff Seele, which is where the 40 to 100% scaling comes from. But most importantly, you get the most broken ability in all of Star Rail, an extra turn. Let's just get this out of the way now. An extra turn is not a follow-up attack, so don't go throwing Seele into a simulated universe team that's on Elation unless you happen to get the 3-star Elation blessing that turns everyone's ults into follow-up attacks. An extra turn is literally a free turn that Seele gets after killing an enemy, so when she enters a free turn, she keeps all of the buffs she had on her actual turn just before, or another way to think of it is that Seele is extending all of her buffs by one turn just for herself with this extra turn. Not only that, but this free turn follows immediately after Seele scores a kill, so enemies cannot interrupt this at all. In a turn-based game that's got some kind of battle order like Star Rail, any ability that lets you screw with the battle order mechanics is usually very strong, if not outright broken, and Seele is a perfect example of this, because she can abuse her combination of high speed and extra turn mechanic to decimate enemies before they even get a chance to fight back. It's the same reason why I consider Bronya's skill to be the best skill in the game, specifically because of its ability to pull up any other teammate's turn right after Bronya's. Now, imagine what happens if they're on the same team. And finally, her technique, called Phantom Illusion. Cell Phone goes Danny Phantom and instantly levels up her stealth stat to 100 for 20 seconds. While she's cloaked, she can't be detected by enemies, so she can run straight past them if you don't feel like fighting them. But if Seele shanks someone out of cloak, she starts the fight as Buff Seele right away. A couple things about her technique. Her stealth is best used by cloaking her out of line of sight of enemies and then running straight past them. She can still cloak even if she's already detected by enemies, and that should break their line of sight and cause them to stop chasing you, but if you cloak too late, enemies can still swing at her and smack her, so be careful with that. Also, if you want Seele to start a fight as Buff Seele, you have to attack with her specifically out of her cloak. You can switch to another character while Seele is invis, but it'll cancel her technique, and she won't start as Buff Seele at the start of the next fight, so keep that in mind. Her trace tree gives her extra attack, defense, and crit damage stats, and her 3 bonus abilities are Nightshade, Lacerate, and Rippling Waves. Nightshade reduces her own aggro level when her HP drops down to or below 50%, so enemies are less likely to attack her when she's low HP. Lacerate increases her quantum resist pierce by 20%, or in other words, increases her quantum damage by 20%, and Rippling Waves pushes her next action forward by 20% after she uses the basic. Defense is the least important stat in her trace tree since she has low base defense to begin with, so you can unlock those last if you can, as long as they're not blocking your way to other stats, and the extra crit damage stats make it so that you can focus on getting crit rate substats in her Relics or her Light Cone instead, which is very nice. As a matter of fact, because Seele is Hunt Path, you can give her Cruising in the Stellar Sea, and that'll give her some free crit rate, or even better, if you have a copy of In the Night, it gives her even more crit rate. For these reasons, it's actually fairly easy to build Seele because she's got easy access to free crit stats, both crit rate and crit damage, which in turn makes it easier for you to give her decent gear. For her bonus ability unlock priority, go with Lacerate first, then Rippling Waves, and then Nightshade. Quantum Pierce on Lacerate is a no-brainer. The action push on Rippling Waves is great since Seele also has a good basic attack that's got a 2 hit count on it, and it should stack with the speed buff from her skill, and Nightshade's aggro decrease is nice against single target enemies, but not so good against AoEs obviously, so while it can save your Seele from a bad situation every every now and then. You can leave it for last if you want, though you'll probably unlock it first before Rippling Waves anyway if your Seele can't hit level 80 yet. And for her ability leveling priority, try to level her skill, ult, and talent all together. But if you have to, prioritize her skill first, then her ult, and then her talent. Perfect Cell's game plan is relatively straightforward. Kill everything. Might want to say it's probably one of the most straightforward. But because of Seele's extra turn gimmick, you legit do want her to finish off as many enemies as she can, so that she can abuse the crap out of it and increase her damage output as much as she can. As such, try to soften up enemy mobs with Seele's teammates so that Seele herself has an easier time taking them down to activate Resurgence. I should have mentioned earlier that the extra turn she gets thanks to Resurgence doesn't trigger again if she kills an enemy on her extra turn, so that way she can't just infinitely loop her extra turns and keep stealing her turns back. After all, this is Honkai Star Rail, not Honkai Seele Rail, where you watch Seele rail all her enemies to death. Except it actually is! This means that optimal Seele play, wherever you can, is to use her first action or her ultimate to kill an enemy, and then use her extra turn to put some damage on a new target so that killing them on Seele's next real turn is easier. Some boss fights don't spawn additional mobs for her to take out, but don't think that this means Seele is somehow weaker in them. All it means is that she can't abuse her extra turns against them, and so she has to play more like a fair DPS character instead. One small optimization that I like to point out here is Seele's ultimate before Resurgence tech, which I'll just call the ult break, since I've been watching too many speedrun videos lately and their naming conventions are living rent-free in my head. Sometimes you'll find yourself in a situation where your Seele either has or is about to get her ultimate, but you want to kill an enemy first and then use her ultimate to attack someone else for energy optimization. Normally, when Seele kills an enemy, she's supposed to get her extra turn right away, but in Star Rail, remember that any character on your team can pop their ultimate at any time if they have it. So, thanks to this system mechanic, it's possible for Seele to kill an enemy and then go immediately into her ultimate before using the extra turn she got from her first kill to be as energy efficient as possible. This wouldn't be a problem if you have Seele's ult already, but if you don't and you still need to use her basic or skill on the first kill to charge it up first, it's going to be kind of hard to queue up Seele's ultimate after she gets her kill so that the game uses her ult first before her extra turn, especially if you're playing on double speed. So if you want to give yourself the best chance of pulling this off, put the game on normal speed first, and then spam Seele's ultimate button so that the game queues it up as soon as she gets the energy for it. And even then, sometimes the game is finicky with when it recognizes your ult command and forces you to use Seele's extra turn first anyway, so it might take some practice. Another tip that I want to point out is her synergy with Luocha. Her main synergy still lies with Bronya, as it should be, but she also has one with Luocha because the healing on his talent field triggers off of any attack that your team does, which, while the game doesn't tell you this, includes follow-up attacks and Seele's extra turn. But since Seele's extra turn doesn't count as an actual turn, it won't count down Luocha's field duration of 2 turns, so it's like you're getting a free heal that you weren't supposed to get courtesy of Seele. Lastly, before we move on, keep in mind that Seele cannot trigger her extra turn off of enemies who have resurrection abilities of some kind, like the Mara-struck soldiers and, of course, bosses themselves when you finish off one of their phases. She can get her extra turn if she kills the Mara-struck soldiers the second time after they've resurrected, but not on the first time. Okay, let's talk light cones. Obviously, in the night is her best in slot, so use that on her if you have it. But if you don't, again, remember that you can get S5 cruising from her to store in Simulated Universe. The most viable 4-star light cone is Swordplay, since it at least partially makes up for the damage that Seele will miss out on from fighting a single target boss. Subscribe for More is not bad, since it buffs her basic and skill, but the problem is that Seele needs to be at full ult charge to get the most out of this light cone, and she wants to be using her ultimate very frequently instead, for obvious reasons. Return to Darkness, the Hunt Battle Pass light cone, is also not bad too, just for its free crit rate, and in case you're fighting a boss who likes to buff themselves a lot. And the most viable 3-star light cone is Darting Arrow, since it synergizes with her Resurgence buff quite nicely. Alright, Relic time! 4-piece Quantum set is her BIS, except no substitutes. If you don't have a suitable 4-piece Quantum set for her yet, then use 4-piece Musketeer, or 2-piece sets from Musketeer, Quantum, or even Thief, since Seele has pretty high break damage potential as well. Her go-to ornament set is 2-piece Space Sealing Station, but she can also work with Inert Salsodo. Just remember that Salsodo's ult buff doesn't apply to Seele since, extra turns are classified differently from follow-ups, and Sprightly Von Walks should be really easy for Seele to hit 120 speed with a couple of speed rolls in her gear. Also, the new Rutilant Arena set we'll get with SU7 can also work too in case you get some good pieces there. For main stats, go attack percent boots, crit rate body piece, quantum planar, and attack percent link rope. I don't think Seele needs better energy gain because even though she does have a pretty expensive ult at 120, all the extra turns that she should be getting will give her plenty more energy anyway, though I can see why you'd want an energy rope on her instead for solo boss fights. And for substats, first and foremost, look for at least 5 extra speed from her relics, so that way Seele's base speed is over 120. Once you've taken care of that, then look for the usual DPS stats like double crit, attack, and break effect. For reference, my Seele has about 40% break effect, and she does like 30k quantum break damage, so break effect substats are not bad on her at all. And finally, her Eidolons. Her E1 is by far her most important because with this extra crit rate, it becomes reasonably possible for Seele to hit 100% crit rate, or at least such high crit rate that she should be critting most of the time. Her E2 is also good since she can stack up to 50% more speed for herself, even more important when you consider that you'll most likely be running attack boots on her instead of speed. Her E4 and E6 are both insane. E4 gives her 15 energy after each successful kill, so she'll be spamming her ult faster than that one guy on Star Rail Twitter keeps spamming Sampo thirst tweets, and her E6 puts a state on any enemy she ults that causes them to take 15% of her own ult damage whenever anyone on your team hits them, which at that point Seele might as well just become part Nihility too. I mean, it kinda makes sense given that Silverwolf's Eidolons turn her into a hunt character too. And that's a great way to seg you into the summary of this video. Seele is an absolutely insane DPS who thinks that turn order in a turn-based game is just a suggestion and considers a full 5 enemy lineup a target-rich environment. Much of her strength comes from her unique extra turn mechanic, but a lot of it also comes from her strong skill and how easy it should be to gear her up and compared to other characters in the game. Honestly, back when Star Rail first came out, I wasn't exactly sure how well Seele would scale into late game, but having played her to this day, I can confidently say that Seele is the best DPS in the game, and like I said earlier, the second best character behind her homie Bronya. So keep calm, build your Seele, and disappear into the sea of butterflies, or something like that. If you found the video informative, useful, or just downright degenerate because of all the gacha games that I have up on my stream at the same time, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for future Star Rail videos, and if there's anything I missed, feel free to share any extra Seele info or tech in the comments for me and others to learn. Make sure to check me out over at my Twitch channel, twitch.tv/ToaSniper98. Stop by if you have any further questions about Seele or Star Rail or just gachas in general, since in case you haven't noticed by now, I'm a bit of a gacha master myself. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys over at Twitch. Peace!